your perspective, you are obviously an incredibly successful individual in many aspects of life. One of those aspects are the way you have thought about investing and making decisions. From your perspective, what do you see as to why Baltimore, why this region, and why now?
Well, I built a firm that, with the help of many others, that invests in the United States and all over the world. And so I've been looking for almost 40 years now at investments around the world. And let me tell you what I see in Baltimore. It has a number of real pluses. Generally, what you want to do when you're looking at investment is you want to pay a reasonable price and not a high price. And prices in Maryland area and Baltimore are relatively lower than they are in New York or Los Angeles, so that's attractive. Secondly, what you want to have is a really reasonably good educated workforce, and Baltimore has some outstanding universities, University of Maryland, and in medical complexes here, but also Johns Hopkins, among other really great schools. So you have an educated workforce. You have people that have an attitude of we want to try harder. In some parts of the world where I invest and spend time, people have a certain quality called arrogance, and they think that they are, the greatest in the world, and they tell you they're the biggest, the best, the smartest. And my experience is that when you invest with those kind of people, sometimes it doesn't work out. So what I often look for are people who are, more modest, have some humility, and actually are trying to work harder. There was an old phrase for Avis when Avis was competing against Hertz, said, "We try harder." And I think people in Baltimore have a interest in trying harder, in Maryland generally. Maryland also has the advantage it's a relatively small state population-wise compared to California or New York. And therefore, if you need to get a hold of the governor or the mayor or other people that are important in deciding governmental things, you can do it more readily. Trying to get a hold of the governor of New York or the governor of Florida or governor of Texas is a little more complicated. And this is a state where people kind of know everybody because it's relatively small in some respects population-wise. So those are some things that I find quite attractive about Maryland and Baltimore in particular.
That's great. Thank you for that. Your own personal story is one that begins here in Baltimore. And when you think about your own life story and your personal path, how impactful and important was it for you to think about the opportunity of purchasing the Orioles and returning this asset to this community? How did you think about that?
Well, when I was a little boy, I played baseball, and I peaked at about 8 or 9 years old as an athlete, and I realized I wasn't going to be a great athlete. I thought I was going to be great, but then around 8 or 9, my friends got bigger than me, and I realized I wasn't going to be great. So I went into other areas. And I spent a lot of my career in New York and Washington, other places, in government and in private sector. But then I always had an attachment to Baltimore. Baltimore was where my parents were born. This is where they were raised. This is where they were educated. This is where they met. This is where they had me, and they raised me, and I got a public school education here. So I had a certain affection for Baltimore, and therefore I felt a certain loyalty to it. And to some extent, I made the decision to buy the Orioles for complicated reasons that are too numerous to mention, but to some extent, it's basically this. I felt that I had an obligation to do more for Baltimore than I had done. I've given away a fair amount of money through my philanthropic efforts, but a lot of that was in Washington, a lot of it was in other parts of the country, but not so much in Baltimore, with the exception of some gifts to Johns Hopkins, where I've been on the board for a while. And I just felt that I had gotten a fair amount out of Baltimore. Baltimore had done good things for me and my family, and I just thought I should do more. And so I thought when there was an opportunity that came along to buy a baseball team, which is part of the DNA of Baltimore. Baltimore, didn't have a baseball team for quite a while. The baseball kind of came to Baltimore in 1954. A team came from St. Louis. And from 54 to now, the team has had some pretty good successes, won 3 World Series, been in 6 World Series. But in recent years, it hasn't done quite as well. And therefore, I thought it was an opportunity to improve things. Whenever you buy something, if you buy at the top of the market, you might feel good for a day or two, but then you paid a high price. If you can buy it, when there's challenges and you can fix things, maybe that's a better opportunity and the price might be lower. So there were complicated reasons, but I thought I wanted to give back to Baltimore, but I also thought the reasons I mentioned earlier, Baltimore and Maryland were an attractive place to be, I thought. Baltimore was really loves the Orioles. I thought there was an opportunity to improve the business side of the operation. When the Camden Yards, which is the stadium here, was opened in 1993 or so, it revolutionized baseball because it was the first time an inner city baseball stadium had been built in 50 years or so, and other stadiums have since replicated that. But Baltimore Stadium is now, the Camden Yards is now 30 plus years old, and so we have an opportunity to improve it, to improve the area around it, and to kind of re-energize Baltimore in some ways around the Baltimore Orioles. So there was a lot of complicated reasons why I wanted to do it.
Well, so on behalf of the entire state of Maryland and all the Orioles fans that exist, thank you. Thank you.
But we haven't. We just lost. We lost today. I was at the game a little while ago. We lost. I thought if I left the game, maybe they do better, but they didn't do better if I left. So it's great when you win, and it's not so great when you lose. And when we were more popular, maybe I don't know if I'll be more popular when I go back because we lost some games. But people, 8-year-old boys are coming up to me and they want an autograph. Now I keep saying, I'm not a player, as you could probably see, and I tell them not to, my autograph isn't going to be worth very much, but I sign them because I don't want to tell anybody no. Then they had a bobblehead of me a couple weeks ago, and I said then they wanted me to sign a bobblehead. Which anybody ever signed a bobblehead? It's not easy to sign those. So it's been fun, and I'm reliving my youth. And interestingly, I've reconnected with people that I hadn't seen in 60 years. I left Baltimore in 1966 when I graduated from high school, and I hadn't seen a lot of these people in a long time, and all of a sudden people are calling me, and the other day I was at a game and somebody yelled out, "I grew up with you, I grew up with you." Now, lots of times people might say that. I turned around and sure enough, this was a guy that I knew in basically when I was 10 years old, and I hadn't seen him since about 11. So it is a way to reconnect with people, and I've enjoyed the experience, and it's obviously better when you win than when you lose, though.
Well, we understand that, but
let me ask you about your story. What are you doing in Baltimore? Now, tell me, you're here, you're a radiation oncologist. Okay.
Yes,
so,
sir.
And you're originally from where?
Born and raised in Philadelphia.
All right, so what's wrong with Philadelphia? What are you doing here?
So given that this is an investment summit for this region, I can tell you lots of things that I would say Baltimore has and this region has over many other parts of the country, including Philadelphia. When I think about the differential assets that exist, that not just attracted me to Baltimore, but importantly, right, 30 years later, kept me here in Baltimore, I do think about the differential assets that define our communities and our region. So in my world of healthcare, I believe that this region is blessed with differential assets when it comes to healthcare. Healthcare education, healthcare delivery, the life sciences are all examples of differential assets. The financial services industry is, again, another differential asset of this region. So you have internationally recognized investment organizations that help drive this region's economy. Obviously, our physical assets of our geography, as you see, being down at Camden Yards, at the Inner Harbor, our physical geography is a differential asset. Manufacturing, our port, all take advantage of that. And so, and then the what keeps my family here is very personal. This community, you talked about it when you think about the size and our connection to each other. I love to say, some people say there are 6 degrees of separation amongst many of us in life. In Baltimore, in this region, there are 2. We are interconnected to each other in ways that I think help elevate the economic opportunities and the opportunities for growth in this region.
Right. Let's suppose we're talking and all of a sudden I have a heart attack right now. Should I go to University of Maryland or should I go to Johns Hopkins? Which should be better?
Again, as I say, citizens of our community are blessed with choice.
Right.
And I think I'm always going to advocate and admit my biases. I think the healthcare we deliver within the University of Maryland medical system is phenomenal healthcare. But I also recognize that one of the advantages of this region, and I say this about the medical system, people often ask me, what's it like to deliver healthcare in the community with Hopkins? Is that hard? Is it? And I say, in life, you rise to the level of your competition. And we are blessed in this community, not just in healthcare, in higher ed, in other examples, to have a competitive ecosystem that raises the bar for everybody. But by the way, if you have an HS brain, I got you.
Okay.
Don't you worry.
Well, okay. So let me ask you one more question. So in the end, you have stayed here. You can go anywhere to run a hospital or a medical complex. What is it about Baltimore that makes it an appealing place to actually live, as opposed to just worry about a career? What's so appealing about having people live here?
Yeah, I think it is the sense of community that we build with each other. I think that we are a globally impactful region of the United States of America. And when I think about that, we are also a community that feels and acts very interconnected. And so for my wife, my daughters born and raised in Baltimore, they will always call Baltimore home. And that's a dramatic differential advantage.
Okay.
So, all right, can we get back to
Go ahead.
Because otherwise I will never be asked to do a fireside chat ever again in the rest of my career. But on the David Rubenstein show, you interview leaders, right? You've interviewed incredible leaders. Are there any lessons that you've taken from those interviews that stand out to you and that have impacted how you lead?
Well, I've been fortunate. I've been able to get a lot of famous people to let me interview them. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, a whole variety of famous business people and political people. I've interviewed, I think, all of the 7 or the last U.S. presidents or so forth. But one thing that struck me was when I interviewed Oprah Winfrey, who's a major TV personality in the United States. Some people may not know her, but she's pretty well known. And I said to her, you're a pretty good interviewer. And she said to me, no, I'm really not. I'm a good listener. What do you mean? She said, I'm good because I listen to what the person says and then I develop another question. And I realized that when you're doing interviewing, it is important to listen because sometimes like an FBI agent comes in and wants to do a background check on somebody and they interview me about it. I noticed that if I say the person might be an axe murderer, they just go down the next question. They don't really ask, well, how do I know the person's an axe murderer? They just want to finish their 10 questions. But if you listen to a person and you pivot from that, you can be a more effective interviewer. And interviewing is actually the reason I do it is, when you get to be a certain age, which I probably am now, when I was working in the White House, I remember saying to Jimmy Carter, you have no chance of losing to Ronald Reagan. He's 69 years old. You can't get out of bed in the morning when you're that old. Now we'd love a president only 69 years old. And now I'm older than 69. But they tell you, and maybe you know as a doctor, that when you get to be a certain age, it's good to keep your brain active. And you can do it by learning a musical instrument. I'm tone deaf, I can't do that. Learning a foreign language, I have no language skills. Learning to do crossword puzzles, I'm terrible at that. So I kind of fell into interviewing because you have to prepare, you have to read about the person, you have to listen to the person, and then come back with something to say that seems somewhat intelligent. So it's actually my way of keeping my brain active. And I don't know, as a doctor, I don't know if you can tell me whether this is going to prevent Alzheimer's from coming or not, but I'm hoping so.
Yeah, well, it certainly isn't going to hurt. And I agree. Staying active is critical both physically and mentally as we age. And that's
another thing.
Great advice.
Maryland, if you look at the list that just came out recently of states that have people that are overweight, we don't have overweight people here. Pretty much, we're healthier. So we have pretty healthy population. Maybe because of Maryland and Johns Hopkins. I don't know.
We hope we're contributing. That's for sure. Another aspect of your life has been your deep commitment to history, to understanding, respecting history, and you've invested and committed resources to ensure that this country understands our own history and respect it. Right. Can you speak a bit about why you are so passionate about that?
Okay, let me try to explain. The theory behind learning history is that if you learn about the past and you are therefore likely to avoid the mistakes of the past and maybe figure out how to do the things that worked well in the past and do those in the future. And so sadly, in the United States, we don't teach history very much anymore, particularly American history. So in the year 2000, a National Science Foundation study came out, and they said we're falling behind the Chinese in various areas, and therefore we have to educate our children, and they have to become more educated in STEM. They came up with a wonderful acronym, STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. The history people didn't have a good acronym, and so then what he really said, you got to invest in history or study history. So the result is, when I was in college, I graduated in 1970 from Duke University. Roughly 8 to 9% of undergraduates in the United States were majoring in history. Today, that percentage is about 1.5%. The most popular major at Harvard, which is not a famous technology school, it's a great school, and I've been involved with Harvard, but the most popular major is computer science. Who would have thought that 10, 20, 30 years ago? So people are not learning history very much, and if you don't learn history, you're condemned to probably relive it. That's what some famous people have said. To give you an example, in this country, to be a citizen in this country, if you're an immigrant, your parents were immigrants from Sri Lanka, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so to be an immigrant, you have to be a citizen, and we have 50 million immigrants in this country. To be an immigrant who's a citizen, you have to take a citizenship test. You have to be here 5 years and take a test of 100 potential questions. Things like, who was the first president of the United States? When was the Civil War? Who were the combatants in World War II? Things that are not that complicated. How many branches are there in the federal government? And it turns out that 91% of the people who don't live in this country by birth, but lived here for 5 years, 91% of these people pass this test and become citizens. The same test was given to people in all 50 states who were born in this country, and only one state, Vermont, could a bare majority in that one state, Vermont, pass the test. So people born in this country can't pass the basic citizenship test, which shows you they don't know much about history. So if they don't know much about history, we're likely to make the same mistakes we made before. That's the whole theory about studying history, is avoid the mistakes of the past and kind of learn from the good things that were done in the past and hopefully do them in the future. All of civilization is about progressing. That's what life is about. Evolution in the science world, we've all know, we're all believe in evolution, I believe. Most people do, I think. And if you believe in evolution, you're basically progressing as you go forward. Well, that's what we want to do in civilization, progress as you go forward, and therefore avoid the bad things in the past and take advantage of the good things. And that's what we should be doing by learning more about history. And that's why I try to remind people of it by fixing monuments or memorials or things like that, because it might remind people of the history of our country. And we're getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which is taken by some to be the beginning of the country. And this should be a time when we really spend much more time learning history. In the United States today, if you go to most grade schools, you can't find that they're teaching American history courses. You can get a really good course in history, American history, in a Chinese primary schools in China. They teach American history better than we teach it here, which is a little sad, you might think. And as a result, we don't really know much about our history, and I think it's a sad thing.
So, thank you. David, when you think about the Baltimore region and your connectedness to Washington, how do you think of that from an advantage standpoint for this region, to have the proximity to the nation's capital and from an investment standpoint?
When this country was created, when we won the Revolutionary War, and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, and the capital of the United States was New York. And some of you may recall this if you watch the play Hamilton. It's illustrated in there. What happened in the Hamilton play, but also happens to be true, is that as a result of the Revolutionary War, the northern states had incurred debt, and the southern states had incurred debt. They were colonies then. The southern states, between the time of the Revolutionary War being over and the 1783, and a couple years later, the southern colonies and states had paid off all their debt. The northern states had not. So when Alexander Hamilton became the first Secretary of Treasury under President George Washington, after we ratified the Constitution, he said we need to get credit back to the United States, have good credit, therefore we have to pay off our debts. These are debts not of the northern states, but of the United States. The southern states said, wait a second, we already paid off our debt, why should we pay the northern states' debt off? So they had a dinner in New York City, which is then the capital, between James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson, and they came up with a famous compromise. The United States capital would be moved from New York and then to Philadelphia for 10 years and then to a southern place. And in return for moving the capital to the south, the southern states would agree to have the northern state debt paid off by the federal government. And that happened. George Washington was then president of the United States. He agreed to, with this agreement, and he was given the authority to go find a place. Ultimately found something on the shores of Potomac. That's where the capital is. And at that time, people weren't sure that Washington would ever emerge as much of a capital. They thought it might just be a nice subsidiary. But Washington grew, and the federal government grew. But for a long time, New York was the center of the financial world and maybe the most important city in the United States. Philadelphia, very important city as well. Boston, very important for a lot of reasons as well. And then outside the East Coast, cities became very important. Washington was not until World War II a dynamic place. But after World War II, people moved to Washington. During World War II, people moved there, and a lot of people stayed there, and became a major city, a much more significant city than had originally been envisioned. Today, we have the advantage in Baltimore of being close to Washington. We're 45 miles away, and basically you can drive there in an hour or so. And so if you need to deal with the federal government, you can get there. And if you want to understand the federal government, it's more easily possible to do so because you can talk to people in the federal government. And so we have an advantage. It's the Baltimore-Washington area, or people like to say I'm watching the Washington-Baltimore area. But this metropolitan area is a gigantic force because you've got not only the population of the Maryland-Baltimore area, the population of the Washington area, and the combined Washington-Baltimore area is one of the bigger metropolitan areas in the United States. So you have the advantage of being close to Washington, but you don't have to actually live in Washington and deal with all the people or members of Congress and people like that you might not want to deal with.
That's great, and thank you for that. The audience are made up of both leaders within the Baltimore region, and importantly, leaders who are thinking about decisions regarding investing in this country, and very specifically investing in this region. What advice would you have for them if they're considering investing in this region?
Well, for investing in the country first, and then let me get to the region. The United States, in my view, despite the tariff kerfuffle we're having now, which I think will not be that significant in the end for a lot of reasons I can explain, but leaving that aside, I think the United States is the single greatest place in the world to invest because of the size of the market, the quality of the opportunities, the quality of the educated workforce, of the financial markets, the ability to get investment capital, to get debt capital, the rule of law, the transparency, and the entrepreneurial spirit of this country is such that I think of all the places in the world, if I could invest only in one, I would invest in the United States. And there are many other places. My firm invests in 75 different countries, but this is the one country where you've got a gigantic market possibilities, quality people, natural resources, and sometimes you have a government that actually helps from time to time. Will Rogers, a famous humorist in the United States, once said, "The country's never safe as long as Congress is in session." And maybe that's true, maybe not. But actually, the truth is, the government works pretty well. We have some challenges from time to time. But on the whole, this is the single greatest country in the world to invest in. There are other great countries to invest in, but if I had to invest in one, this would be the one. In terms of the region, well, as I indicated earlier, the cost of living is a little bit lower here than it is in California, or it is in New York. The taxes are a little bit lower than it is in New York or in California. The quality of the workforce is very good, but not quite as expensive as it might be to hire people in other parts of the United States. And when you combine Washington with Baltimore, you've got a 50-mile corridor where you've got extremely talented people who are well educated and often willing to work at lower prices than they might work for in California or New York. So I think it's an attractive area, and it's in the country that I think is the best place in the world to invest.
That's great. So when you think about your own investments in this region, obviously the Orioles being a very public example of that, what excites you most about this region and about this time?
Well, the region I'm excited about because I am familiar with it, and I know it reasonably well. I've lived in this region virtually my entire life. But I also think that the opportunities are less expensive here than they are elsewhere. There's a kind of, as I said earlier, we try harder mindset. We want to prove to people in New York that we're as good as they are. We want to prove to people in California we're as entrepreneurial as they are. And so there's a lot of very good technology pockets here in the Maryland area. in Washington suburbs as well. And there's also a very good workforce, educated workforce. And I think just a lot of good things going on. Nothing's perfect. We're not perfect. No place is perfect. But as I look at the places in the world that I have an opportunity to invest in, this is one where I feel safe. I feel that I'm going to get my money back. I'm going to make a profit on it. I'm going to feel that the workforce is pleased with what we've done. So on the whole, I'm pretty pleased with this area as a place to invest and as a place to live.
That's great. Recently, last week, Warren Buffett announced his retirement as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. You've had the opportunity, as you mentioned, to have interviewed, and I'm sure you know him.
I do.
On a personal level. When you think about his approach to leadership and his successes, do you think that there are some lessons that we could all take away from that?
Warren Buffett is a unique person. When I first met him, 40 years ago, I didn't think he was that impressive. It was nice, but I didn't really, I didn't know. At that time, it wasn't that big as Berkshire Hathaway wasn't that big. What he's done over the last 40 years is something that's unbelievable. And the truth is, he's made 99.5% of his money in the last 5 years or so, because the value of what he's done is appreciated so much. So it's an incredible story. It's probably not replicable that easily, because he was a person that lived outside of the mainstream of New York, Washington, Baltimore, California. He basically lived in Omaha, could therefore get the perspective of that. He didn't have a big ego. He had a pretty good sense of humor, pretty cheap, so he didn't spend big prices for anything. One time I went out to lunch with him, and he offered the treat. We went to lunch, and then after we walked out, he said, I probably should leave a bigger tip. He went back and put another $1 on the table. But he didn't get caught up in all the wealth kind of phenomenon. When you make a great deal of money, there's a tendency in human nature to show it off. But he didn't feel like he did that. He's living in the same house he lived in for 50 or 60 years. Doesn't really, have any fancy accoutrements of wealth, and he's pretty down-to-earth guy, but just very, very smart. And I don't know if it's easily repeated by his successor or by anybody, but very, very impressive person. But also, what I most admire about him is pretty good sense of humor, self-deprecating humor, and humility. And humility is a virtue that I think is sometimes overlooked. But some of the people that I most admire have humility. And the one I think the greatest American of all time was humble, and his name was Abraham Lincoln. He didn't walk around saying, I just signed the Declaration of Independence. I just signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Aren't I great? Or I just, gave the Gettysburg Address. Isn't it a great speech? Shouldn't I get a pat on the back for that? He didn't do that. He won the Civil War, really, and he didn't brag about it. So great, humble person, and that's the kind of leadership I admire a lot.
It's a great life lesson. David, listen, on behalf of the Greater Baltimore Committee, the Investment Summit, Select USA, and most importantly, the community of the Baltimore region, thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you.
And importantly, thank you for your commitment to our region.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye.